Welcome to Reality Bytes on the 27th of August 2015, and I'm going to be talking all things trans tonight. Human, transgender and transport. I'm going to start off with, transhuman, I guess, in a way. But there's a well-known phrase in the UK, I'm not sure if I think the same things in the States. Some people would lose their heads if they weren't stitched on. Well, it seems that Dr. Frankenstein is alive and kicking these days, and the first one is about head transplants, believe it or not. Independent, August 14th. Human head transplants, are we close to making them a reality? Even if we figure out how to fuse spines and restore connectivity, we still don't know whether the brain can rewire itself to control a new body without the body's immune system attacking it, argues neuroscientist Darren O'Haley. Thanks to Frankenstein's monster, Robocop and the cyborg commandos of Ghost in the Shell, extreme portrayals of transplant surgery have captured our imagination over the years. The story of a patient's hand grafted onto a leg in China after an industrial accident to preserve it before being restored to his arm is just the latest success story to gain worldwide attention. So when Italian neurosurgeon Sergio Canavero first announced his intention to perform the first ever human head transplant by December 2017, part of his head anastomosis venture or Heaven project, science fiction seemed to inch a little closer to science fact. Well, I guess he's done it already, if he's that confident. Or somebody has. Canavero's idea involves a 36-hour surgery during which the head of a patient suffering from a debilitating disease would be fused at the spinal cord to a brain-dead donor with an otherwise healthy body. Well, you've got to be brain dead to be a donor in the first place, I guess. Despite scientists and surgeons voicing some serious doubts about that such a massive undertaking would be successful, Canavero is adamant that the technology now exists. By employing his novel Gemini protocol, he argues the likelihood of success is around 90%. Well, how does he know that unless he's actually done it? But just how well do his claims stand to scientific scrutiny? Below are just three of the many important issues that haven't been convincingly addressed. The fundamental principles. First of all, let's look at how the surgery would be performed. The head of the patient and spinal cord of the donor body would be cooled below 20 degrees centigrade. This would give the surgical teams less than an hour to simultaneously remove both heads at the neck, transfer the head of the patient to the donor body, and reconnect the spine and blood vessels before nervous system cells begin to decay. The spines would be held together and stabilised, and a specialised compound known as polyethylene glycol would be used to connect the bundles running through the spinal cords. After all the blood vessels, neck muscles and connective tissue are sewn up, the patient would be placed in a chemically induced coma for 3 to 4 weeks to allow the connections to seal and recover. One of the fundamental principles behind this procedure is that severed spinal cords possess the ability to reconnect, but that spinal injuries smash up millions of connections beyond repair. Canavero argues that by splicing through the spine with an extremely sharp knife, the most intact fibres would reconnect with the help of the PEG glue and electrical stimulation. He illustrated this concept at a TED Talk earlier this year, where he compared a banana squash at the centre with one finely sliced with a sharp knife. So he's a bit bananas, isn't he? Serious flaws in Canavero's proposal include the failure of previous animal models or the implausibility of keeping the head alive during the procedure. Canavero, however, is not only convinced that the head could be connected, but that it could gain full control of the body. To understand whether his conviction is warranted, we should look at the neuroscience behind his arguments. Neurons in the brain sprout tails known as axons, which travel through the spinal cord to send and receive signals to and from the body. In a spinal cord injury, these axons are severed, preventing the signals from reaching their target. To some extent, Canavero is correct that the spine is equipped with the tools to repair axons, but these connections are actively blocked by the almost immediate formulation of glial scars. Glial scars are clusters of immune cells that flock to the site of injury when the spinal cord is damaged. These scars patch up holes in the axons and protect against further injury, but they also release chemicals that stop the two ends from fusing. Canavero's Gemini protocol makes no mention of glial scars, which would likely prove to be a fatal hindrance to his procedure. If we ignore the glial scar problem, the next question is whether using polyethylene glycol to fuse the spinal cords would actually work. PEG has indeed been shown to promote axon repair to some extent, but most of these experiments were performed on cells isolated in a lab, as opposed to in the body. Some promising results have, however, been shown in recent animal models. One group used PEG to treat rats with fully severed spinal cords, and found that some axons did reconnect. They also restored some movement, with some rats gaining minor control of their hind legs. No doubt these findings offer some important implications for treating spinal cord injuries, but when considering how this could be applied to a head transplant, the devil is in the detail. No, I think the devil's in the scientific lab, don't you? Only the physical control of the body of the rats was tested, which means that we are still unsure as to whether they regain sensation in their lower bodies. The PEG treatment also offered only modest improvement in function and repair of cells in the spine. Most importantly though, the rats' spines were disconnected at the thoracic level TH8/9. This is a region about halfway down the spine, which is low enough to preserve the most important bodily functions. In Canavero's procedure, the spine would be cut at the cervical region, where axons carry signals involved in functions that keep the body alive. Unsuccessful fusion of these axons would leave a patient paralysed and breathing with a machine. Well, I guess if they got the head cut off, that's not going to make much difference, is it? Canavero claims in this proposal that a research group in China has already successfully carried out a similar operation in mice. This is partially true in that 18 out of 80 mice operated on survived for 3 hours after being taken off a ventilator. Importantly, there was also no spinal fusion with these mice, and the brainstem of the donor bodies were kept intact. As the brainstem controls vital functions including breathing, the mouse heads were essentially stitched onto a paralysed incubator. Although Canavero's proposal is an exciting idea, exciting is it? Frankenstein is exciting, eh? The research simply doesn't support his claim that we now have the technology to pull it off. However, significant advances are being made in the way treating spinal cord injuries through stem cell therapy or forming bridges over glial scars. A more robust and stable development of this technology would be an important step in the spinal cord injury treatment and a possible first step towards realising Canavero's vision. We still have a long way to go, however, before we can start swapping our bodies. Even after we figure out how to fuse spines and restore connectivity, we still don't know whether the brain can rewire itself to control a new body. We know from studies into hand transplants, which are several magnitudes less complex, that function can be restored to some degree, but even this varies in success with our current technology. More worryingly though, episodes of the immune system attacking the transplanted hand are extremely common. This could be a catastrophic event following a head transplant, as the donor body's immune system could attack the head. To convince neuroscientists that this procedure could work, more compelling evidence is needed. In Canavero's own paper, he argues that a preliminary experiment would need to be performed on a primate model. Whether or not this would even be ethical, given our current understanding, would be another major question. That's because they say that primates are nearly human, eh? For Canavero's ideal to be realised, science has some massive hurdles to jump. Before we move on to humans, we should start with fixing the banana. Or maybe we should start fixing the doctors, eh? Or the scientists, as they like to call themselves. But I suppose every head needs a brain, doesn't it? And here's another article. The brain grown in a lab. Researchers say breakthrough could help test drugs and shed new light on Alzheimer's. Now, if they can grow a brain in a lab, presumably it's going to be good enough to stitch onto anybody, because they can give it whatever DNA they want, I guess. So it won't be rejected. A near-complete human brain comparable with that of a 5-week-old fetus has been grown in a laboratory dish. The brain organoid was created from reprogrammed skin cells and is about the size of a pencil eraser. Scientists hope the lumpy mass of functioning nerve cells and fibres will prove to be a valuable research tool for non-animal testing of new drugs and investigating brain disorders such as Alzheimer's. As well as neurons and their signal-carrying projections, axons, there's that word again, and dendrites, the brain also contains support and immune cells. It's 99% of the genes present in the fetal brain, a rudimentary spinal cord, and even the beginnings of an eye. Lead researcher Professor Rennie Anand from Ohio State University is in the US said, "It not only looks like the developing brain, its diverse cell types express nearly all genes like a brain. We've struggled for a long time trying to solve complex brain disease problems that cause tremendous pain and suffering. The power of this brain model bodes very well for human health because it gives us better and more relevant options to test and develop therapeutics other than rodents." What could it be used for? Well, put it inside that head, I guess. Already the scientists have gone on to create brain organoid models of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease and autism in a dish. With the addition of a blood circulation, which is currently lacking, they also hope to use the model to study stroke therapies. Military applications include research on Gulf War syndrome, traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. Or maybe they'll just develop a brain that's really, really violent with no conscience whatsoever to put inside the soldiers' heads once they stitch them back on. Who knows, eh? But robots. Well, here's a guy who's actually got something stuck in his head so he can hear colours because he's colourblind. A human antenna that hears colours, this is in the Mail Online, 23rd of August, a human antenna that hears colours, a drummer's robotic hand and an ear in a man's arm. See the amazing technology that is turning us into robots. Well, I'd say a lot of people out there are robots and it's nothing to do with technology. A robot challenging children to a game of Connect 4, an android dancing to Gangnam Style, and a genuine human cyborg. It is no wonder thousands of children and adults flocked to the University of Technology in Brisbane on Sunday to take part in Robotronica, an event that celebrates society's increasing reliance on robotics. The free one-day event not only gave Queenslanders an opportunity to see the practical applications of robotics today, it offered tech heads a glimpse into what life could look like in the decades to come, when robots are expected to play a far more crucial role in day-to-day life, and I'll be coming on to that in a minute. Neil Harbison, Robotronica guest and the first government-recognised cyborg, is a perfect example of humanity evolving with technology. Mr Harbison, from Belfast in the United Kingdom, was born colourblind, but 12 years ago he decided to let his doctors drill a hole in his skull so they could attach a permanent antenna to his head, which now allows him to perceive colour as different sounds. I wanted a new sense for colour, and I needed a new body part as well. It's more independent from my other senses, he told ABC News. While the 33-year-old said his special headgear can sometimes attract some unwanted attention, he thinks artificial prosthesis, like his iBorg, will be far more commonplace by the year 2020. With Robotronica being one of the biggest robotics events open to the public in Australia, it comes as no surprise that Mr Harbison was not the only human being using robotics to achieve the unthinkable. Musician Jason Barnes, 25, from America, lost his arm in a workplace accident 3 years ago. He underwent 7 injuries after a transformer exploded, sending powerful surges of electricity throughout his body, which unfortunately damaged his right hand beyond repair. Despite his physical handicap, Mr Barnes has been named the fastest drummer in the world. See, it's improved him, hasn't it? All thanks to his robotic arm. Mr Barnes designed the prosthetic arm with the help of expert Professor Gil Weinberg, which he said now allows him to continue doing what he once loved, the ABC reported. Does that mean he doesn't love it anymore? The robotic arm relies on both electronics and Mr Barnes' physical movements to function. While Mr Barnes controls one stick physically, he is also assisted by electromyography muscle sensors. The other stick is able to listen to the music and improvise to follow the beat. Professor Weinberg has also developed a robot named Shimon that is astonishingly capable of listening, improvising and collaborating with human beings to create brand new music. Another interesting amalgamation of technology and human innovation has been in the making for the last 20 years. Performance artist Stellark, who is also a professor at Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia, showed off his scientifically grown third ear, which is located on his left forearm. Now, why would you want to do that unless you're a complete nutcase? Eh? It's partly surgically constructed and partly cell-grown, Stellark told the Today Show. A biopolymer scaffold was inserted into my arm, skin was suctioned over it, and then over a period of 6 months it encourages your cells to grow into the scaffold. It grows its own blood supply, so this ear becomes not only fixed but a part of your body. While the ear makes for an interesting conversation starter, it isn't just for show. The professor plans to make it internet-enabled, so people can log in and eavesdrop on him at all times. QUT creative director Jonathan Parsons said that many people are unaware of the important role robots play in our life today. He said Robotronica was a great opportunity to educate people about what we could expect from them in the future. This event is designed to unpack the fear surrounding robots and say, well, it's not something to be feared. Really? Can you imagine this thing when it's not actually an ear? It's just something under somebody's skin, and they can listen, they can record and watch everything you're doing without your knowledge when they're standing right next to you. But it doesn't mean the world around you is changing, and if you do want to participate in a robotic society, a robotic culture, which is what we are seeing happening, it does require some different sorts of skills. Those who weren't ready for such a permanent union with technology were able to interact with numerous installations. The public were able to play Connect 4 against a robot named Baxter, trying to manoeuvre a robotic hand, watch an android showcase its acrobatic ability on a trapeze swing, or see a device called Harvey that plucked capsicums from a tree with a mechanical arm by sensing the vegetable's colour with a camera. There go your fruit picker jobs, eh? And after all that, if your inner geek was still unsatisfied, Darth Vader, his entourage of stormtroopers, were poised and ready to join participants for the perfect souvenir photograph. And the photograph is in this article, and it shows, as it says here, 2 gun-toting stormtroopers forced a man to his knees at the Robotronica event in Queensland, and that's what's coming, Robocop. And they're standing there with, they look like submachine guns or very, very modern shotguns or some type. But they've got this guy on his knees with his hands behind his back, and these are robots, you know. So I'm going to play a little bit of audio now and then move on to the military. If I can get it to come up.
We've been also working on humanoid robots. Some of the ones that Gil showed from the DRC were built by us, and they're derived from these models we're showing here. But again, our focus is on balance and dynamics, and working a little bit the way people and animals do, where you move quickly in order to keep yourself stabilized if you're disturbed. So we use that rock bed as a means of stabilizing, and sometimes we just kick the robot or use a weight. We're interested in getting this robot out into the world. Out in the world is just a totally different challenge than in the lab. You can't predict what it's going to be like. This isn't completely out in the world because there's that power tether, but we're working on a version that doesn't have that. And, you know, all kinds of stuff happens out there, and we're making pretty good progress on making it so it has mobility that's sort of within shooting range of yours. I'm not saying it can do everything you can do, but you can imagine if we keep pushing, we'll get there.
Interesting phrase at the end of that, wasn't it? Mobility within shooting range. Yeah? And that's what we're going to come on to now. Google's 6-foot robot takes first steps into the real world. Google-owned Boston Dynamics has unveiled footage of its Atlas robot stomping through the woods. Boston Dynamics, the robotics company owned by Google, has unveiled the first footage of its humanoid robot taking steps in the wild. Mark Raybert, the founder of Boston Dynamics, unveiled the footage at a conference in Massachusetts earlier this month. It shows a 6'2" Atlas robot making tentative steps through a forest before breaking into a fairly pacey run, as well as it being tested in lab conditions. The 300-pound Atlas robot uses stereo cameras and a laser rangefinder to perceive its surroundings, and I guess its targets. Atlas has 28 joints allowing it to mimic a range of human actions. Its ability to walk has already been tested in the lab, but the unpredictable real world creates new challenges. Out in the world is a totally different challenge to the lab. You can't predict what it's going to be like, Raybert said. Boston Dynamics hopes to remove the power tether attached to Atlas, giving it more independence. The company, which was bought by Google in 2013, is attempting to recreate the movements patterns of animals and humans in its own creations. When it's at risk of falling over, Atlas makes rapid steps in order to stabilize itself and will also balance on one foot when hit from the side. Well, why would it be hit from the side? Is it in a war zone? Last night, Boston Dynamics demonstrated how Atlas mimicked the crane kick from the Karate Kid, so the head doesn't need weapons either. Atlas is ultimately expected to be used in search and rescue operations, or I guess that's why it has to do karate kicks, particularly in conditions that would be dangerous to humans, like being next to this thing. As well as humanoids, it has a range of animal-like robots. Boston Dynamics is part of Google X, one of the divisions that will be separated from Google's core business as part of its Alphabet restructuring. But this is the Telegraph, 29th of July. Will killer robots be the Kalashnikovs of tomorrow? Terminator-esque soldiers may be part of tomorrow's warfare, but banning them just means leaving them to the bad guys. What, the government? There is a visceral unease with autonomous weapon systems killer robots raise in both public and expert minds. In an open letter released today, a group of artificial intelligence experts have renewed calls for a ban on research and development into offensive automated weapons. Well, fat chance of that happening. The letter argues that such R&D will spark an arms race, and autonomous weapons will become the Kalashnikovs of tomorrow in the hands of terrorists and warlords. So they've got to keep them all to themselves, I guess. It is unquestionable that the world would be a better place if these weapons never exist. What is less clear is that this justifies a self-imposed ban on their development by the audience of the letter, the governments, universities and companies of the West. That's where the signatories are overwhelmingly from, because they want to keep it all to themselves, that's why. Their argument applies also to war, and when you do so, it is clearly specious. War is not beneficial to humanity, but this does not mean that any individual nation is unjustified in preparing for it. Humanity has so far worked out only how to make war unlikely at a local level. A universal ban has not yet stuck. Until it has, readiness for war cannot be wrong. The Kalashnikov analogy is pertinent. Consider the position, say, of those responsible in the late 1940s for arming the US infantry. If highly effective rifles that are simple to operate are in the offing, should they not have developed the M16? Likewise, we know that within 20 years this low-end technology could be in the wrong hands, and we need to prepare ways of maintaining our country's security against this eventuality. One of the applications of small-scale automated weapons could be swarm attacks, where hundreds of such units attack in simultaneous coordinated assaults. Defending against swarms will require your own swarm, where the algorithm is set to identify machines rather than people is a matter of detail. No, actually, if you're a human being, it's quite important. So there's no relevant distinction between offensive versus defensive killer robots. This does not mean that we should just throw up our hands in despair at the impossibility of constraining the harm caused by low-end killer robots in 20 years' time. Rather, serious efforts should be invested in domestic and international arms control regimes. It's not accidental that it's the Kalashnikov that has been the tool of choice for so many deaths in nasty small wars, rather than the M16. The Kalashnikov has been available, and geopolitics largely explains why it is a weapon of choice. The Soviet Union armed its favoured insurgents with Kalashnikovs, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, these weapons have emerged in a variety of failed states and dictatorships. Well, they're actually made in Europe now, so I don't know why they're talking about Russia. The more general point is that a self-imposed ban on the development of automated weapons is justifiable only if the ban can be made to stick with those who are rivals and enemies too. This assumes that the weapons are not wrong in themselves, like dum-dum bullets which kill through undue suffering. and they think a robot's going to be nice to you. Such a ban is perhaps a plausible approach in the cases where high-end automated weapons are to be used, and where industries and testing programs are visible with limited actors involved. It is deeply implausible, however, that such a ban will stick for low-end technology, the kind you can build in your basement, precisely because this is within reach of so many limited actors. I guess that's your politicians. But again, the Telegraph goes on. This is 27th of May 2015. Killer robots will leave humans utterly defenceless, warns Professor. Robots called LAWS, funnily enough, lethal autonomous weapons systems, will be able to kill without human intervention. I guess it's just the law then. Killer robots, which are being developed by the US military, will leave humans utterly defenceless, an academic has warned. 2 programs commissioned by the US Defence Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, are seeking to create drones which can track and kill targets even when out of contact with their handlers. Writing in the journal Nature, what's that got to do with anything to do with drones? Nature? Stuart Russell, Professor of Computer Science at the University of California, Berkeley, said the research could breach the Geneva Convention and leave humanity in the hands of amoral machines. Well, they're already in the hands of amoral machines. Again, they call them politicians. Autonomous weapon systems select and engage targets without human intervention. They become lethal when those targets include humans, he said. Existing AI and robotics components can provide physical platforms, perception, motor control, navigation, mapping, tactical decision-making and long-term planning. They just need to be combined. In my view, the overriding concern should be the probable endpoint of this technological trajectory. Despite the limits imposed by physics, one can expect platforms deployed in the millions, the agility and lethality of which will leave humans utterly defenceless. This is not a desirable future. You don't say. The robots called LAWS, lethal autonomous weapon systems, are likely to be armed quadcopters of mini-tanks that can decide without human intervention who should live or die. DARPA is currently working on 2 projects which should lead to killer bots. One is Fast Lightweight Autonomy, FLA, which is designing a tiny rotorcraft to manoeuvre unaided at high speed in urban areas and inside buildings, and kill you without any human intervention. The other, and Collaborative Operations in Denied Environment, CODE, is aiming to develop teams of autonomous aerial vehicles carrying out all steps of a strike mission: find, fix, track, target, engage, assess, that means kill, in situations in which enemy signal jamming makes communication with a human commander impossible. Last year, Angela Kane, the UN's High Representative for Disarmament, well, that's a joke, isn't it, said killer robots were just a small step away and called for a worldwide ban. But the Foreign Office has said while the technology had potentially terrifying implications, Britain reserves the right to develop it to protect troops. Professor Russell, I thought troops could protect themselves these days. Professor Russell said laws could violate fundamental principles of human dignity by allowing machines to choose whom to kill. For example, they might be tasked to eliminate anyone exhibiting threatening behaviour. And define threatening behaviour. Protesting something? Debates should be organised at scientific... All those cops better watch out, eh? Debates should be organised at scientific meetings, arguments studied by ethics committees. Doing nothing is a vote in favour of continued development and deployment. However, Dr. Sabine Howard, a lecturer in robotics at the University of Bristol, said that the public did not need to fear the developments in artificial intelligence. My colleagues and I spend dinner parties explaining that we are not evil, but instead have been working for years to develop systems that could help the elderly, improve healthcare, make jobs safer and more efficient, and allow us to explore space or beneath the oceans, he said. She never mentioned they were building them to kill people, funnily enough. She's such a nice lady, of course. But going back even further, May the 12th, the Telegraph again. Artificial intelligence experts are building the world's angriest robot. Should you be scared? A New Zealand AI company is creating an extremely angry robot. But is this a cause for concern or an exciting computing development? Well, I guess it's exciting for those psychopathic maniacs that build these things. It sounds like the beginning of an apocalyptic sci-fi film. A New Zealand artificial intelligence company is building the angriest robot in the world in the hopes of helping companies to understand and placate angry customers. The technology firm Touchpoint Group has spent more than £230,000 on the project, which is expected to be live by the end of the year, when it will be ready to kill folk. So, is it time to start preparing for the robotic revolution? Not quite, though the long-term future of artificial intelligence is undeniably unnerving. The robot will only simulate anger, apparently. Though it may seem aggressive, Touchpoint's robot won't come close to experiencing bona fide rage. Instead, the machine will have hundreds of millions of angry customer interactions uploaded to its database, and the robot will be programmed to mimic and repeat these conversations. Dr. Stuart Armstrong, a research fellow at the Future of Humanity Institute, well, the future of humanity's death, by the sound of things, at the Oxford Martin School, Oxford University, says that anger is a relatively easy emotion to seemingly replicate in robots. There's not much variety in human anger. If someone's angry, they'll just hurl insults at you. There's not much subtlety of interaction, so you don't have to code anything complicated. Anger is easy to imitate without having to go into depth, he says. Fake robot anger is very basic for now. Touchpoint's angry robot will only be programmed to show basic signs of rage and will behave in a markedly different way from a genuinely angry human being, Dr. Armstrong explains. It just kills you. Why should we be afraid of a human who's angry? Well, because they might do something stupid and lash out. Robots are not going to start punching the person at the other end of the phone or spreading angry messages on Twitter. They're not going to do a whole host of things that you would expect a genuinely angry person to do, unless it had been programmed to do that. And that's the line, isn't it? Unless it had been programmed to do that. And that's exactly what they're going to do. And that's how you can tell that their anger is purely situational. A sign that a robot has feelings is if they act in a way that we would expect a human to do, but they weren't programmed for. Truly scary robots don't show any emotion. Theoretically, we might one day be able to build robots that exhibit all human signs of anger. So there you go, they will kill you. There's a complicated philosophical debate about the point at which mimicked emotion and consciousness is indistinguishable from actual emotion and consciousness. If a robot can exactly mimic human consciousness and react with the same emotional responses to the same events, then are we really justified in calling it unconscious? Well, obviously not, because it's just told you it's mimicking human consciousness. But such an advanced computer is a hypothetical creation that we might see by the end of the century, and certainly won't see in the next decade, really. And if we do create an angry human-esque robot, there are a far lesser concern than emotionless robots. Like our politicians. Computer scientists are more likely to make an error with emotionless robots, which they might be less wary of than robots that exhibit anger. If we can create genuine anger as an emotion in robots, everything in our background tells us that this is dangerous and this is not something that should be placed in a position of power, says Dr. Armstrong. And programmers with sinister intentions would intentionally avoid angry robots. If you want to cause harm, create a murderous robot, but don't make it angry. If you want to cause harm, then creating the thing that signals danger to all humans is exactly what you want to avoid, says Dr. Armstrong. Instead, robots that have no human evidence of emotion could, hypothetically far in the future, create a far greater threat. Dr. Armstrong says, everything in our evolutionary background prepares us to deal with angry entities and knowing whether or not to trust them. If we get a robot that's angry in a classically human sense, we know so much more about how to deal with it than a robot that does not exhibit anger of any sort, but may have goals that are very dangerous. The dangerous ones are the ones that do not correspond to anything that we can classify on a human scale, the ones that are indifferent to some crucial aspect of the world. If AI are indifferent to humans, it's obvious how that could go wrong. If they're indifferent to some aspect of humans and they get great power, well, that aspect of humanity may vanish. Humanity may vanish. Should we worry about AI at all? Though angry robots may not be such a threat, Dr. Armstrong says that it's extremely difficult to predict whether or not artificial intelligence will eventually cause harm to humans. It's difficult to predict, but it's going ahead and doing it anyway. Intelligence itself has allowed us to dominate the planet, so potentially higher intelligence might lead to much higher power, he says. AIs could become extremely powerful and then their preferences would influence the direction of the future. If these preferences are indifferent to some human element, then things could end up quite badly for us. But though it seems certain that AIs will become more powerful in the coming decades, it's far from certain that they'll reach a significant level of power. There's great uncertainty here, Dr. Armstrong says. So he's unsure of it. He keeps saying that they won't reach a level of power good enough to wipe out humanity, but he says he's uncertain about it. How to program robots to avoid harm? Dr. Armstrong says that the threat posed by artificial intelligence is a technical problem being addressed by computer scientists. the same one that made the crazy robot in the first place. One option is to specify and code human values, which is an extremely difficult task. The disagreements among human values is almost unimportant in comparison with the difficulty of specifying this value sufficiently so that it can be coded. You have to solve all of moral ethics in computer code, says Dr. Armstrong. Dr. Armstrong is working on an alternative solution and is investigating whether robots can be made safe by programming it for reduced impact. He explains, it won't kill you, it'll just break your legs. If you programmed the robot to remove a tumour then, once the human is gone, it might then immediately cut off someone's leg. Its motivation to remove your tumour is not safe. But if you programmed it to remove the tumour and have a small impact on the person, then it will remove the tumour without then doing something so drastic. So we've made an unsafe goal safe by adding reduced impact to it. Many values become a lot safer if you program the robot so that it won't do a huge change. I don't see the logic in that paragraph whatsoever. The future of artificial intelligence is extremely uncertain, and computer scientists like Dr. Armstrong are working to make sure we'll be safe from dangerous robots, but they're building them. But for now, the angry robot in New Zealand poses no serious threat. Sci-fi horror stories haven't become reality yet. But here's some nutcases who've taken it even further. Robot mother builds babies that can evolve on their own. This is Independent, August 13th. Robotics could answer the mystery of how we came about, researchers say, and might make way for robots that can improve themselves without our input. So, bear in what I said in the last article about angry robots, they're now saying that robots can improve themselves without any human input, so they can program themselves to kill you. Scientists have created a mother robot that can build babies out of mechanized blocks and then create new ones that evolve from the previous generation. The findings showed that robots could be able to evolve on their own, in the same way that animals and humans have. Like biological evolution, the robot's mother could look out for the best traits in her children, or the worst, and then use those to improve the following generations of robots. In 5 different experiments, robots set the mother, which looks like a big robotic arm, to work building generations of 10 different children. They were built out of small plastic cubes with motors inside. The experiments found that those baby robots passed down all of the best traits. The last generation of children could perform tasks twice as quickly as the first, according to the results posted in the journal PLOS 1+1, I guess. Each of the robots carries a genome made up of different genes, like humans do. As the generations were built, they passed them down and they mutated and cross over, deleting and merging genes to choose the most effective. So it's eugenics for robots, eh? Natural selection is basically reproduction, assessment, and so on, said lead researcher Fuyima Aida of Cambridge's Department of Engineering in a statement. That's essentially what this robot is doing. We can actually watch the improvement and diversification of the species. During the experiment, the children were tested to see how far they could travel in a given time. The characteristics of the winning robots would be kept, while the losing ones would be discarded. It's survival of the fittest, isn't it? The process of robot evolution could give us some insight into how humans came about too, according to the researchers. One of the big questions of biology is how intelligence came about. We're using robotics to explore this mystery, said Aida in a statement. We think of robots as performing repetitive tasks, and they're typically designed for mass production instead of mass customization, but we want to see robots that are capable of innovation and creativity, and it might also eventually help us create robots that can improve themselves without any input from humans at all. At the moment, robots require us to fix them. They wouldn't themselves begin to stand up on their hind legs, for instance, but eventually that might change. It's still a long way to go before we have robots that look, act and think like us, said Aida, but what we do have are a lot of enabling technologies that will help us import some aspects of biology to the engineering world. So there's your ultimate transhuman fantasy, eh? And they'll do it, and we'll have robot policemen just shooting anybody that says boo to them. But I mentioned Kids Company a couple of weeks ago, and I said the whole thing stank, and of course it does. They're involved in bribery and corruption, all sorts of things. But here's what else they're involved in. Kids Company recruited troubled teenagers for brain scans. Experts warn of massive ethical issue over charity's role in controversial research on link between unhappy childhood and crime. Maybe they just wanted children who were kind of into a bit of crime and stuff and take their brains and put them in somebody else's head. Who knows? Kids Company recruited around 100 troubled teenagers for a controversial program of analysis, including brain scans attempting to prove that being mistreated as a child can turn people violent. The test, strongly supported by the bankrupt children's charity founder Camilla Batmangeli, a passionate advocate of the theory, continued even after the results from an initial round of research proved negative as emerged. I guess you wanted more money for that as well. Experts at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London carried carried out an initial series of tests involving MRI scans on a small group of teenage boys almost a decade ago, but said they found no evidence of a link between the brain and antisocial behaviour. I wonder if they found the children again. Despite this, dozens more teenage boys associated with Kids Company have taken part in scans and other tests through other institutions. Kids Company has also spearheaded a major £1.6 million fundraising campaign for further research, which it said will demonstrate that neglect and trauma can have a lasting effect on children's brains, and that its own work was transforming children's lives. Okay, from transhuman to transsexual, and this is an independent on transgender. Sorry. It's to be politically correct. Independent, August 17th, and this is a remarkable claim. I don't believe a word of this really, but young people will. Half of all young people in Britain are at least a little bit gay, survey finds. Half of British young people say they are not 100% heterosexual, according to a new survey. When asked to plot themselves on the scale of sexuality ranging from exclusively heterosexual to exclusively gay, 72% of adults and 49% of people aged 18 to 24 chose a position other than completely straight. Well, why would they? The survey released today, I mean, you're either straight or you're not. Or you're gay or you're not. You're not somewhere in between. The survey released today by respected pollsters YouGov found only 4% of adults class themselves as completely gay, with just under a fifth putting themselves somewhere in between the two extremes. So there you go, only 4% of adults admit to being gay. So why do they have all these extra rights and big parades? With each generation, people appear to see their sexuality as less set in stone. Of 1,632 people surveyed, 60% of heterosexuals and 73% of homosexuals supported the idea that sexuality is a scale. Less than half of 18 to 24-year-olds think they are completely straight, and 43% say they're somewhere in the middle, allowing for a few respondents who had no opinion. This compares to those, they're the clever ones. This compares to those aged 60 and over, where 89% said they were completely straight or completely homosexual. Well, there you go. That's because culture has led people to believe they've got to question their sexuality, and they've got TV and all the rest of it to convince them otherwise. Most of these respondents would have been of school age when male homosexuality was legalised in 1967. About a quarter of those aged between 18 and 39 reported, I don't know what that means, having had a homosexual experience, compared to just 9% of those aged 60 and over. That's a lot, isn't it? 18 and 39 reported having a homosexual experience, a quarter. I find that incredible. More people report having had more men report having a gay experience. A fifth of males compared to 14% of females report having had a sexual experience with someone of the same sex. I don't believe that either. Respondents were asked to put themselves in one of 7 levels of sexuality, ranging from 0, 100% heterosexual, to 6, 100% homosexual. Levels 1 to 5 increasing levels of homosexuality. Will Dahlgren, a data journalist at YouGov, said, "Clearly these figures are not measures of active bisexuality. Overall, 89% of the population describes themselves as heterosexual, but putting yourself at level 1 allows for the possibility of homosexual feelings and experiences." So you're completely straight, so it allows you the possibility of homosexual feelings. Where's the logic in that statement? Of course, I mean, this is the government doing this. And why? You've got to ask yourself why. More than anything, it indicates an increasingly open-minded approach to sexuality. The world saw an outpouring of emotion after the Supreme Court made same-sex marriage legal across the US earlier this year. Really? Did you see it? Did you see this outpouring of emotion? Gay pride marches have been held in many countries across the world, including those hostile to homosexuality, such as Uganda. Well, as I say, 4% of the population have got gay pride marches. How does that happen? Unless somebody's behind it, to pardon the pun. But here's a site called standforfamiliesworldwide.org, and it's part of a huge article, and this part's on children, and it's titled "Targeting Children: Comprehensive Sexuality Education." In recent years, sexual rights activists have shifted a great deal of their efforts to children and have made young people one of their main targets. A primary way they do this is by promoting comprehensive sexuality education as an international right mandated by law. This is because if they can raise up the next generation educated in their radical sexual ideologies and teach them to advocate for these as protected human rights in laws and policies in their communities, then they will have largely won the battle. Comprehensive sexuality education comes in many forms and can be disguised as human rights education or life skills programs. Most comprehensive sexuality education programs contain a number of the following components. Teach children to advocate for sexual rights. Teach children various ways to obtain sexual pleasure. Promote condoms to children without informing them of their failure rates. Teach children to masturbate. encourage children to experiment sexually with individuals of their own sex or the opposite sex, promote anal or oral sex to children or teach them these behaviours are safe, promote promiscuity to children as a right, denigrate the religious and cultural values of the parents or community, and provide sexual counselling, information or services to minors without parental consent. And all of that's happening in schools these days. Most if not all, of the UN promoted or UN funded sexuality programmes contain many of the programme elements noted above. You can click here for a special report exposing these UN supported programmes. You can also go to www.stopsexualizingchildren.org to learn more, and I suggest parents do. The Obama administration is at the forefront of this movement at the United Nations to establish comprehensive sexuality education for children as young as 10 as an international human right, and US representatives at the UN consistently oppose any language advanced by pro-family countries that is intended to protect the rights of parents to guide the sexual education of their children. In fact, during negotiations at the UN Commission on Population and Development, well, it's interesting they're talking about population when they're talking about sexuality of children, because they don't want those children having children. And development, and if they make them gay, then they won't have children anyway. And development in April 2012, US representatives angered delegates from developing countries because the US sponsored a resolution on maternal mortality, insisting on a provision calling for comprehensive sexuality education worldwide. The UN then refused to allow a reference recognising the prior rights of parents to guide the education of their children to be included in the resolution, relegating parents to merely having a role in helping guide their children's education and paying for it as well. International Planned Parenthood Federation. One of the largest purveyors of comprehensive sexuality education programs in the world is International Planned Parenthood Federation. IPPF's sexuality programs are designed to raise up the next generation to demand their sexual rights. For example, an excerpt from IPPF's publication Exclaim, distributed at the United Nations, states, "Young people are entitled to sexual pleasure, and how to experience different forms of sexual pleasure is important for their health." This is what they are teaching to children as young as age 10. The Exclaim publication also teaches children how to organise and advocate for their sexual rights. Thank you very much, Bill Gates, and your father, and Margaret Sanger, and all those creeps. And who was it? Julian Huxley, one of the first heads of Planned Parenthood. Brother of Aldous, Brave New World, and this is exactly what this sounds like. IPPF's It's All One Comprehensive Sexuality Education. International Planned Parenthood It's All One programme was launched at a special invitation-only breakfast event at the cafeteria at UN headquarters in New York. This programme is endorsed by the United Nations Fund for Population Activities and was created by the Population Council. It's All One asks teachers to lead discussions on homosexuality, sexual diversity, how sexual minorities are treated in society, and how their rights are violated. Even more concerning is the fact that It's All One claims its priorities were established by the global health and education agencies, including the United Nations General Assembly, UNAIDS, the World Health Organization, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, which of course is what Julian Huxley was the first head of as well, and that it responds to international policy and mandates, including the Millennium Development Goals. In other words, It's All One programme claims it is what the UN has mandated that children should receive, and that's worldwide. So when you get government education ministers say they're making policy, well, it's all coming from the UN. It's here in black and white. Here are some of the assignments and activities It's All One suggests for children. Preparing a short skit involving an intimate relationship, married, male-female, unmarried or same-sex couple. A worksheet on sexual desire that includes questions on erections, vaginal lubrication and sexual fantasies. Discussion on how sexual minorities are treated in society and how their rights are violated. Real case studies and discussion on homosexuality with the objective of empathising with them. Discussion on whether attitudes and ideas about sexual diversity in society are changing. A true-false test on sexual behaviour that includes questions and answers on masturbation, orgasm, ejaculation, oral sex, sexually pleasing a partner, penis size. A case study on informed consent gives an example. Isaac has had several partners, but lets Ivan, his new boyfriend, believe that he is still a virgin, as Ivan is. When they have sex, Ivan agrees not to use a condom, thinking there is no risk of infection. Can Ivan give free and informed consent? An activity on making difficult decisions requires students to create a comic strip based on ideas from a list of suggested difficult decisions, including, you have decided to tell your partner that you are not experiencing pleasure or orgasm during sex. Planned Parenthood operates in most countries of the world and is making billions of dollars off the sexual services for children and adults. In 2010 alone, IPPF received $3.5 million from multiple UN agencies including UNFPA, UNAIDS, UN Women, the WHO and the World Bank. Planned Parenthood brings teams of lawyers and youth to UN conferences to pressure governments to establish comprehensive sexuality education as an international human right in UN conference documents. They also manipulate governments of developing countries to call for comprehensive sexuality education or sexual education in their statements to the UN. This is a private corporation. What are they even doing at the UN? They hide the more controversial aspects of CSE and claim that CSE programs will lift developing countries out of poverty and prevent teen pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases, among other things. Prevent children. A number of the people representing developing countries in UN negotiations are actually paid employees of International Planned Parenthood, who offer their services for free as technical experts, when in reality they get on government delegations to promote the sexual rights agenda of Planned Parenthood in UN negotiations. They are good at what they do, and this is bad news for the children of the world. UNESCO's International Guidelines on Sexuality Education. The first head of UNESCO, Julian Huxley. Created in collaboration with UNFPA and the UN Population Fund, the World Health Organization and UNICEF, the International Guidelines on Sexuality Education are completely in line with the philosophies of Planned Parenthood and other sexual rights organizations. In fact, one of the main authors of the guidelines was from SIECUS, the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, the main purveyor of similar sexuality curricula in the US. Below are some examples from UNESCO's Guidelines on Sexuality Education. Respect for sexual and gender diversity. A man who becomes a woman and is attracted to other women would be identified as a lesbian. Masturbation is not harmful. Both men and women can give and receive sexual pleasure with a partner of the same or opposite sex. This is what they're promoting. UN General Assembly report. Children have a right to sexuality education. In October 2010, the UN General Assembly received a radical report from the Special Rapporteur supposedly on the right to education. The report claims that there is now an international human right to comprehensive sexual education, which includes a right to pleasurable sexual experiences. The report further claims that this right can only be realised if children receive comprehensive sexual education from the outset of their schooling. In other words, according to this report, children as young as 5 or possibly even preschoolers must be taught about their right to sexual pleasure. This report was created by UN Special Rapporteur Werner Munoz, who received a mandate from the UN to issue the report on the right to education. A special rapporteur is supposed to be an unbiased expert appointed by the UN to study and report on an issue. However, Mr. Munoz clearly exceeded his mandate and was promoting his own personal sexual rights agenda with his report and his unilateral attempt to establish a fictitious right to sexual education. And of course, it suits these perverts, because then the child has a right to experience sex with an adult, because it's a human right, and the paedophiles get away with it. In the report, Munoz states that he considers that pleasure in and enjoyment of sexuality should be one of the goals of comprehensive sexual education, abolishing guilt feelings about eroticism that restrict sexuality to the mere reproductive function. He means pornography there. He's not talking about eroticism. With regard to HIV, the report declares that restricting sexual education to the issue of sexually transmitted diseases may create an erroneous association between sexuality and disease, which is as harmful as associated with sin. No, it's not. You don't die of sin. You die of diseases. With regard to religion, the report warns that in some cases sexual education has been obstructed in the name of religious ideas, and then adds that comprehensive education acts as a guarantor of a democratic and pluralistic environment. Well, some countries don't want that, and you've no right to impose it on them. The report also criticises barriers to sexual education, such as allowing parents to exempt their children from such education. I'll read that again. The report also criticises barriers to sexual education, such as allowing parents to exempt their children from such education. What happened to parental rights? Where did they go? So in other words, religion and parents should not interfere with the state's obligation to sexualise children in order to guarantee this democratic and pluralistic society. The report discusses what helps young people have better sex lives, as if improving the sexual lives of youth is a valid goal of governments, and it strangely states that the goal of education for sexuality is to develop a transforming role for men by going beyond the strictly genital and physical aspect, whatever that means. The report cites to the UNESCO International Guidelines on Sexuality Education, which calls for respect for diversity of sexual orientations and identities, and cites a UN committee ruling that governments are required to ensure that sexual education programs did not reinforce stereotypes or perpetuate prejudices regarding sexual orientation. But worst of all, the report endorses the radical Yogyakarta principles, which have been called the Magna Carta of the sexual rights movement, claiming that these principles have to be taken into account in education, because of its inclusion on the diversity perspective. The report concludes by calling upon the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights to investigate specific problems relating to barriers and challenges to effective enjoyment of the right to comprehensive sexual education, and for the UN Human Rights Council to question member states during the periodic reviews about how they are ensuring the enjoyment of the right to comprehensive sexual education. Finally, the US under the Obama administration has been leading the charge at the UN to promote comprehensive sexuality education for children as young as age 10. And they wonder why people are getting gay. Well, they've been forced into it, aren't they? But here's another thing that's doing it. This is back in November 2009 in the New York Daily News. Study. This is how long they've known about it, and way beyond that. Study. Chemicals in plastic can make boys act more like girls. Chemicals found in many plastics are causing little boys to act more like little girls, according to new research. A team at the University of Rochester studying the safety of phthalates, chemicals in the plastic used in many household objects, found that they can actually disrupt hormones, according to BBC News. The chemical affect the baby's developing brain by deactivating testosterone, the male sex hormone, according to the BBC, and that's why they've got plastic teats on milking bottles. In the study, scientists tested urine samples from pregnant mums for traces of phthalates, which can actually mimic the female sex hormone, estrogen, according to the Daily Mail. The women gave birth to 74 boys and 71 girls, who were studied at age 4 and 7, with the mums questioned about the types of toys and games their kids liked, according to the BBC. The boys exposed to higher levels of 2 phthalates were less likely than other boys to play with guns, trains and cars, says the BBC, and they seemed less likely to join in rough and tumble games, according to the Daily Mail. And there was an article this week about some guy who took his son to the store and he bought a Barbie doll, and he was thinking it's such a wonderful thing, but he's not asking how his son got gay. While some experts think phthalates may be partly responsible for low sperm counts in men over several decades, this is the first study to link kids' behaviour to hormone-mimicking chemicals, according to the Daily Mail. Phthalates may reduce levels of testosterone in unborn babies between the 8th and 24th week of pregnancy, according to Dr. Shanna Swan, University of Rochester Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology and lead author of the study. And that's why, all these women are drinking bottled water these days. That fad. And these phthalates are in that plastic, which is leaching into the women's bodies and affecting the children. This alters the developing brain and male genitals, she told the Daily Mail. An earlier study from Dr. Swan found that boys born to mums with the highest phthalate levels were more likely to have smaller genitals and undescended testicles than other boys, the Daily Mail says. Phthalates are found in items like packaging and plastic furniture, according to the BBC. And babies' milk bottles, of course, but they don't mention that. They are also in the shoes, polyvinyl chloride flooring, and shower curtains, reports the Daily Mail. They're in all plastics. How concerned should a parent be about phthalates? There is the potential to alter development in early pregnancy, Swan says. There are a lot of things that can go wrong during pregnancy, and this is not causing missing limbs. There are subtle changes. It's not causing missing limbs, but it's affecting your brain. One way to reduce phthalate exposure, she says, is to cook and store food in glass, not plastic, and that's why they're getting rid of glass. Not all plastics contain phthalates, but it can be difficult to know which do. Well, all the ones you eat out of, that's for sure. I don't want to panic people, Swan says, but I do want to raise the concern that we really don't need all these chemicals contacting us in our daily lives. Well, of course you don't, but it's happening. Here's another one. This is what happens when you get too many of them, I guess. Transgender teen 16 is freezing his eggs before he makes the full switch to be a man so he can have a baby with a future partner. A transgender 16-year-old girl, now is a boy actually, is freezing his eggs. A girl is freezing his eggs. This is how they get in your head, isn't it? Before he makes the full switch to become a man so he can have a baby with his future partner. College student Riley Middlemore, 16 from Gloucester, was born a girl called Rebecca, but revealed to his family last year that he wanted to have a gender change. He's hoping to have a full £10,000 sex change on the NHS. The NHS can't afford to keep patients in hospital with cancer, but they can get a sex change once he turns 18, including a mastectomy, hysterectomy and penis construction. But the brave teenager, who binds his 34C chest and shaves his long brown hair, has decided he wants to freeze his eggs first so he can have a biologically related child. Well, he can't freeze eggs, can he? Because he's don't have eggs. Again, they're just using semantics to mess with your mind. He said, my partner would be the surrogate and carry my eggs. That way I can have children that are biologically mine with my partner. And I wonder if he's going to tell her that she's a man. Eh? Riley said he must live as a man for a year before he can be referred to a gender identity clinic, where doctors will give him hormones to deepen his voice and give him facial hair. The 16-year-old said he was always a tomboy when he was growing up and would often share toys and clothes with his 4 brothers. I'll call him he-she, started to hate the way he-she looked when he-she started puberty, but felt he-she could not speak about his-her inner turmoil. I wore my brother's clothes. It became more difficult when I started puberty aged 12, she said. I was trapped in the wrong body, but I kept it to myself. Riley, who has always fancied girls, came out as gay last December, and then shortly afterwards told his mother Carrie, 36, she wanted to become a man-woman. He revealed, a lady boy, I guess. He revealed the truth just before his mother came round for tea with his new then girlfriend, who is fully aware of Riley's new identity. Well, she's experimenting, just like she's been told to by UNESCO. The teenager said, Mum was coming round to have tea with my then girlfriend. I was worried my partner might refer to me as Riley, or he, his then girlfriend. I guess she didn't hang around long. I said to Mum, I need to tell you something. She said, you want to be a boy. She had guessed and just hugged me. His mother admitted she initially struggled to accept her only daughter was becoming a boy, but said she just wanted her to be happy. When she told me he wanted to have a full sex change, I was worried because it's such a major operation, she said. But I just want her to be happy. They went to Riley's GP together, and the 16-year-old is now having counselling sessions before she can be referred to a gender identity clinic. But it doesn't stop with their children. What about Obama? There's a lot of rumours about Obama and his husband, wife, whatever you want to call him or her. But this is what Obama's up to now. Barack Obama appoints first ever transgender White House staff member. The White House has its first ever transgender staff member. Rafi Friedman Gusman has been appointed as Outreach and Recruitment Director for Presidential Personnel at the White House Office of Presidential Personnel, Barack Obama's senior advisor Valerie Jarrett confirmed. I wonder what he wants her for, Maybe a little bit of slap and tickle in the Oval Office. In a statement emailed to the Washington Post, Jarrett said Friedman Gusman demonstrated the kind of leadership this administration champions. She said, her commitment to bettering the lives of transgender Americans, particularly transgender people of colour and those in poverty, reflects the values of this administration. They're very low then, aren't they? Mara Keisling, Executive Director of the National Centre for Transgender Equality, commented, President Obama has long said he wants his administration to look like the American people. We're all bent. I have understood this to include transgender Americans. A transgender person was inevitably going to work in a White House. I bet there's been a few there before, and they weren't there for work. Well, not the kind that these guys are talking about. That's the first. I bet they were all paid for it as well. That the first transgender appointee is a transgender woman of colour is itself significant. It's probably his wife. And that the first White House transgender appointee is of a friend is inspiring to me and to countless others who have been touched by Rafi's advocacy. I bet they've been touched by a lot more. That's it for tonight. I didn't get time to get onto the transport side, but we'll do that on Monday. Okay, thanks for listening, folks.